Jeffrey, I'm curious, looking at something like doctors, which is the most virtuous career perhaps I could think of. You imagine medical professionals, therefore, by the analogy that, or the idea that virtue would be critical in this pursuit of happiness, would be happy. And yet studies suggest that doctors are far from happy. Their burnout rates have spiked post-COVID. Healthcare workers, in many cases, are more likely to be depressed or suicidal than the general population. I know you're not an expert in psychology or the medical profession, but I do wonder how you square that virtuous life and its outcomes against the framers' ideas that doing good, happiness.
Well, I would resist the impulse to talk about virtue in the abstract. What's so striking about the framers is how practical they are, and disaggregating virtue into these virtues of the soul, avoiding the perturbations of the mind, as Cicero said, means that you could have a doctor who's dissatisfied by the burnout of work, but is successful in practicing mindfulness and calming his anxieties, or can have effective personal relationships with his kids, but is dissatisfied by health insurance. There's no such thing as a virtuous profession. It's very important to stress this is a radically empowering philosophy of self-mastery, and each individual has the opportunity on not only a daily but hourly basis to try to achieve that calm tranquility that defines self-mastery, which makes possible long-term happiness. And that's why it's also there's such connections to the Eastern traditions, and that idea that we are what we think in life shaped by the mind is so important. My dad, who died at 95 when I was finishing the book, was a great hypnotherapist of the 20th century, and he saw deep connections between the wisdom of hypnotherapy, that as we imagine ourselves to be, so shall we be, and the classical wisdom about virtuous self-mastery. And I think he would have emphasized that for each of us, whatever our profession is, we have the opportunity on not only a daily but hourly basis to achieve that calm self-mastery, regardless of what else is going around about us in the world and in our professions.
Right. I want to ask about that, this idea of kind of regardless of whatever is going on around us, because that kind of stoicism, I don't know, Roger, I'm curious to explore your perspective on it, because, one way of looking at what's happening to medical professionals, but just anyone in a very challenging position, is around pain and pleasure. So how do you think those factor in?
Well, I think virtue and pleasure are quite different. Mm-hmm. So I have to admit that a vicious person could live a very enjoyable and happy life, and equally a virtuous person might be very unhappy. And I take it that doctors are in that category. I was struck there by Jeffrey's mention of calm tranquility, because that brings out again how I suspect that when it comes to how one should live one's life, we may not disagree very much. In that, I take it that most people we count as virtuous, or many people that we count as virtuous, would live lives of calm tranquility. It's just that you need more than, so doctors are not racked by guilt. They're quite happy with what they're doing. It's just that there are other sources of happiness which are not available to them, like sufficient recreation.